David is now being accused of messing with another young girl, and now she has decided to make a statement publicly. This young girl is saying that she was with David at the same exact time that he was with Celeste Rivas Hernandez. She gave a statement and this photo of her and David to a content creator who has been looking into this David case for quite a while now. She says, "Hi everyone, I know nobody knows who I am, but I was a victim of David Burke. I'm just going to say how happy I am to see him arrested."
Celeste Rivas Hernandez may not have been the only young person drawn into David Anthony Burke's world. After his arrest, information began emerging about at least one other individual who reportedly had an intense online relationship with him while underage. One allegation was particularly unsettling. She said David joked about cutting off her arms, an image that, in light of the forensic details that later became public about Celeste's remains, took on a far more disturbing meaning in retrospect. The investigation also raised questions about the broader scope of David's online activity. Prosecutors have stated that approximately 40 terabytes of evidence were collected during the investigation, far larger than the amount initially described as recovered from his phone alone, suggesting the digital evidence extended across multiple devices and sources. This breakdown covers what has emerged publicly about a second individual, what the documentary record of David's messages suggests about patterns in his behavior, and what the limits of public information are in separating confirmed court evidence from online speculation. David Anthony Burke has pleaded not guilty to all charges. He is presumed innocent unless and until the evidence establishes otherwise through the formal legal process. To protect her privacy, the second individual whose account became public can be referred to as Jane. Jane said she first contacted David during the summer of 2022, the same year that prosecutors alleged David and Celeste Rivas Hernandez first made contact online. What began as online communication gradually became far more frequent, with the two eventually texting and speaking by phone on a daily basis. She described David as 18 at the time and said he could often seem caring and attentive. Yet there was another side to their conversations. At times, she said, he became stern, and on several occasions his behavior left her uneasy. One of those moments involved Itami, a manga-inspired alter ego David had created for his music videos, a character presented as his sinister fictional double who would commit crimes that David would then have to solve. The character appeared throughout his anime-style visual content and featured prominently in the romantic homicide video where Itami appeared carrying a knife.
Bro, I pissed myself. I pissed my pants. I'm so serious. You guys don't like JB like I like JB, bro. I'm telling you, bro.
Okay,
The character had been publicly discussed in David's promotional materials and online presence before any of the allegations in this case became public, and it functioned as a deliberate element of his artistic identity, a dark alter ego connected to the visual themes of his music. During one conversation, Jane joked with David that she could beat Itami in a karate fight. David responded that she could never beat Itami. He then joked, she said, about himself and Itami cutting off her arms. It was a joke, but it came out of nowhere, she recalled. At the time, she apparently interpreted it as dark humor, in light of what later became publicly known about the forensic condition of Celeste Rivas Hernandez's remains, specifically that her arms had been separated from her body during the alleged dismemberment. That exchange took on a very different meaning for Jane. "This is insane," she said when she made that connection. She said her heart dropped. It is important to be precise about what this exchange establishes and what it does not. A dark joke does not constitute evidence of future criminal conduct. Itami was a documented part of David's publicly released creative work long before any of the allegations in this case emerged, and the joke occurred within the context of an ongoing conversation about that character. The exchange cannot be treated as proof of intent or foreknowledge. What it provides is context for why Jane's account attracted attention from people following the case, and why investigators examining David's full communications across multiple individuals and platforms found accounts like hers worth documenting.
Identity has remained hidden because I deserve a life outside of the case. I went through a lot with David, and this is all very hard for me, but to see him behind bars brings a smile to my face. I feel safer and more at peace with my life. I appreciate everyone who helped bring me and the other victims to justice. I know things haven't fully been done, but they will be.
The broader point about Itami as a character is also worth making clearly. The existence of a dark fictional character in an artist's creative work does not establish anything about that artist's real-world conduct. Courts have consistently recognized that artistic expression, however dark or disturbing, is categorically different from evidence of actual criminal intent or behavior. David's music and its visual themes cannot be treated as a confession or a documented plan. They are creative work, and they need to be evaluated as such, not as evidence in and of themselves, but as context that helps explain why certain communications later took on different meaning for the people who experienced them. Jane said she was 16 at the time of those conversations, 2 years younger than David, who was 18. She initially viewed his remark as an example of an unusually dark sense of humor. It was only after learning the details alleged in the Celeste Rivas Hernandez case that the earlier conversation appeared very different. The timing of Jane's relationship with David is one of its most significant aspects. Her communication with him reportedly overlapped with the period during which prosecutors alleged David and Celeste were in contact, meaning these were not entirely separate chapters of his documented online activity. The overlap raises a question that multiple people following the case have asked. Were Jane and Celeste the only young people David was in close contact with during this period, or were there others whose experiences have not yet become part of the public record? Jane said their relationship ended around the middle of 2023. In her account, David told her they were at different levels of maturity and different stages of life. He was touring, he had a music career starting, I was in high school, she explained. That explanation itself contains a notable detail. David himself explicitly acknowledged that she was still in high school and that this difference in their circumstances was the reason to end the relationship. That explicit acknowledgement is worth noting. David was aware she was still in secondary school during the period of their contact. Whether that acknowledgement was coupled with genuine recognition of the significance of the age difference, or whether it simply reflected a practical calculation about logistics and access, is not something the public record can fully establish. What it does document is that her educational status was part of the explicit framework David used when describing their relationship and its limitations.
Mind you, even the media heard of allegations of David being with other minors that they actually asked if David was going to be charged with any other minors at the press conference to the district attorney. Mind you, now we have the private investigator Steve Fisher saying that this minor has went and gave a statement to the cops about her alleged relationship with David and also gave them tons of photos and evidence of it. And now, according to this young girl's own statements, it appears that she believes that she's about to get justice.
Jane believed Celeste may have experienced a very different side of David than the one she knew. I feel like she got the worst version of him, a different version. It's just really shocking and saddening, she said. In her account, David had presented himself during their contact as strongly opposed to smoking and drinking, extremely religious, and as someone who had never previously had a girlfriend. When he was in a bad mood, Jane said, he preferred to pray rather than discuss what was troubling him. The picture she described was of someone who presented a disciplined, faith-centered exterior, a presentation that, if accurate, would be consistent with the active management of how he was perceived by people in his life. After their relationship ended, more than a year passed without communication. Then, during the period when the investigation into Celeste's case was ongoing, with questions about whether charges would be filed continuing to circulate publicly, Jane said she dreamed about David around his birthday. When she woke up, she decided to send him a Bible verse. Don't be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. David responded. His message expressed religious language. To see you quote scripture is a joy. I thank God for how greatly you've blessed me more than you know, to see how the Father can shine light through me that brings more glory to him than can ever be brought to me. His message continued. I pray that he keeps you in his arms and that you continue to abide in him.
That's her in my classroom in front of this poster right here. Okay, hold up. I got another one because I got a picture on TMZ of this other kid exchanging stuff with the rapper who we alleged did this stuff. Hold on a second, because he's also in my classroom.
Jane said receiving any response at all was unexpected. I definitely think it was shocking because I didn't think he would ever respond or talk to anyone. I didn't think I'd ever hear from him again. That exchange documents continued communication across a lengthy period of silence, religion remaining central to how David presented himself, Even as serious questions continued to build around the Celeste investigation, and even as the public record of his digital activity was being assembled by investigators. Whether that specific exchange is relevant to the formal criminal case is a question the prosecution and defense will address through the trial. What it adds to the publicly available picture is evidence of ongoing communication patterns that persisted across the investigative period. Rolling Stone published a broader investigation into David's online relationships, and Jane's account was among those documented.
How long ago was
we all just found out yesterday who it was, but she's been missing since I taught her. So when I taught her, she met this dude on social media. He was a rapper in LA. He came and got her. She ran away from home. She was gone for like a month. The cops found her in Hollywood, brought her back to our school. She came back to our school, kind of told people this story.
The article described a pattern of contact with multiple young women during the period relevant to the prosecution's formal case, a pattern characterized by emotionally intense communication, explicit acknowledgement of the other person's age and school status, discussion of secrecy, and expressions of intent to reconnect later. What Rolling Stone's investigation cannot establish on its own is whether every relationship it documented constituted criminal conduct, exactly how many individuals may have been involved across the full investigative period, or what the 40 terabyte evidence collection ultimately revealed. What it adds is independent journalistic documentation of a pattern, multiple emotionally close relationships with young women maintained during overlapping periods with consistent recurring elements across those relationships. Those consistent elements are what makes the pattern analytically significant beyond any single account. A single relationship characterized by secrecy, acknowledgement of school attendance, expressions of religious faith, and statements about reconnecting later could be explained contextually.
She disappeared again in May of that year, May of 2024. That's when her friends told me what happened, and it was this rapper. And then I found out yesterday that she's now dead in that rapper's car, cut into pieces. You want to know how they met? I feel like I just said it. Social media.
Multiple independent accounts describing the same recurring elements documented in private messages that appear to reflect consistent language and framing point towards something more structural than coincidental. That is the analytical contribution of the broader investigation. Not that any single account proves additional criminal conduct, but that the documented pattern across multiple accounts provides context for understanding how the relationship with Celeste was built, maintained, and sustained over years. Another document circulating publicly was a set of messages attributed to David's communication with a third young woman. In those messages, David appeared to explicitly acknowledge that she was still in high school while describing an emotionally close relationship that David himself characterized as complicated. In those messages, David wrote, "I really love you, but I've been checking my schedule for the rest of the year and next year, and I'm barely in Texas. I believe long-distance relationships work under the right conditions, like you being able to travel with me, but you're still in school." He continued, "I don't like hiding anything from anyone. I would love to have a public relationship with someone, but the way that it's going, we have to be secret or something, and I want you to be happy, but you still have so much left to do these last 2 years of high school."
It says, "I knew someone who dated David and was a minor at the time," and they post this photo right here. Now, I ended up running this image on several different AI detection engines, and they all came back as not being AI generated. Now, at the very beginning of this case, we got text messages from David that he had sent to another underage girl that he was talking to, and he was basically letting her know that he wanted to break things off because he was going to go on tour, she was still in school, and the long distance just wasn't going to work out for him.
He then left open the possibility of reconnecting. It may change your view on this entirely, and I'll gladly wait for you if we're both in the right headspace when that time comes. I want to still be here for you though, and talk like we did before it got complicated. I love and care about you, and I need to make sure you're not alone. We are still interlinked. The phrase, "we are still interlinked," drew particular attention from people following the case. Read without projection. The messages primarily show David explicitly acknowledging that the other person was still in high school with 2 years remaining, discussing the need for secrecy, and expressing the intention to wait for changed circumstances. His own words document awareness of her age-related situation, the need for the relationship to remain hidden, and continued emotional attachment despite acknowledged complications.
So many people were thinking that maybe this is her, but these messages were sent in 2023. And according to these photos, at least from what I'm seeing in the backgrounds, they had to have been taken in 2024 or 2025. So this right here is an image of the inside of the home that David was renting in the Hollywood Hills when Celeste Rivas Hernandez's body was found. As you can see, there are lights that are in the ceiling, circle lights, and then there's like a caved in part of the ceiling that I think is either a light or like a sunroof kind of thing. And you can see those lights and that kind of like increase in the ceiling in this photo right here.
The authenticity of those specific messages has not been formally established through any court proceeding. They circulated publicly before any formal evidentiary presentation. They should be understood as part of the public discussion surrounding the case rather than as established court record, significant for what they appear to document, but requiring formal authentication before they can carry evidentiary weight in any legal proceeding. A public discussion of the case also produced statements from individuals claiming direct involvement. One post that circulated on Reddit, reportedly verified by the platform's moderation team as genuine, appeared to be from a person identifying herself as a third individual involved in the case. Her post read in part, "This is victim number 3. For those saying that I did not go to the authorities, that's the first thing I did. Obviously, I went to the authorities. I'm involved in this. I went through so much, and I want to be able to live my life without being in the David case. I'm doing everything possible to help this case." That statement requires careful handling on multiple levels. Reddit moderation verification confirms what the moderation team concluded about the account's authenticity. It does not independently verify every underlying claim the person made. What the statement documents is that at least one additional individual had contacted law enforcement and self-identified as being directly involved in the investigation. Her decision to decline sharing specifics publicly, stating only that the case was ongoing, reflects sound judgment for someone potentially serving as a witness.
Look at the background of this specific photo right here and pay attention to some of the details, the photographs on the wall, the dresser, the floorboard. You can see that it matches this photo right here and this photo right here. And David did not actually get access to this home until a lease was signed in February of 2024, which is conveniently enough around the same period of time when Celeste first ran away from home in February of 2024. So was David dating two minor girls in 2024, or is it possible that he was dating Celeste in 2024 and started talking?
Public statements from potential witnesses can be used during cross-examination, and that risk is real and significant regardless of the merits of what a person experienced. Her statement also included an important observation. "I know there are other girls out there like me." Whether that reflects personal knowledge, inference from her own experience, or online discussion is not established by the statement itself. What it adds is another individual's public indication that the known accounts may not represent the complete picture of what investigators encountered. The legal significance of this individual's post is limited by the fact that additional allegations involving separate individuals would not automatically become part of the formal criminal case involving Celeste Rivas Hernandez unless prosecutors determine them to be legally relevant and admissible. Separate allegations may require their own investigative determination and, if they result in charges, their own proceedings. The absence of public charges involving additional individuals does not prove that investigators found nothing. It means any such findings have not yet resulted in public formal charges as of this stage. Steve Pfizer, the private investigator who has been publicly discussing the case and who was ordered to leave the courtroom during the preliminary hearing, also indicated publicly that additional individuals had provided information to him, including claims about photographic evidence of another individual and David at his rental property. He argued that investigators should pursue lesser charges if the evidence for homicide faces challenges at trial. It is important to note clearly what Pfizer's statements represent. They are the public claims of a private investigator hired by parties connected to this case, who was removed from the courtroom during formal proceedings. His claims carry the evidentiary weight appropriate to that context. They are not court testimony, they have not been tested under oath, and they cannot be treated as established fact. Whether his specific allegations about additional individuals are accurate, verified by law enforcement, or relevant to formal charges is not established by his public statements alone. He is one source operating outside the formal legal record, making claims that will need to be evaluated by that formal record rather than by his public assertions. What his statements add to the analytical picture, alongside the Jane Doe account, the Reddit post, and the broader Rolling Stone investigation, is a consistent pattern of multiple sources publicly indicating that the known documented relationships may not represent the full scope of what investigators encountered across the 40 terabyte evidence collection. The unreleased song reportedly attributed to David, identified online under the title Maybe, also attracted attention from people following the case. The lyrics included references to Valentine's Day and 3 Girls on My Mind. Valentine's Day has been noted in the documented timeline because the Operation Awesome messages, David's detailed logistical planning to help Celeste secretly leave her family home, were exchanged around that date in February 2024.
This is a pattern of this guy talking to females who are much younger than him, and him acknowledging that it's wrong and that he has to keep it a secret. And we see the same thing when it comes to Celeste. I mean, he had to have known that this was a child. She looks like a and in his Discord, we are actually seeing the messages where she admits to being 13 years old. This is it right here.
The critical analytical point about the lyrics is this. Song lyrics are not automatically autobiographical, and there is no verified basis to conclude from them alone that they reference Celeste, Jane, or any other specific individual. Artists write fiction. They write from perspectives other than their own. They use imagery that does not directly reflect literal experience. Treating unverified song lyrics as direct evidence of real-world events is a misapplication of evidentiary reasoning. What can be noted is that the lyrics attracted public attention in the context of an investigation that had already raised questions about the scope of David's personal relationships, and that public attention itself became part of the broader documentary record of how the case was discussed and understood while formal proceedings developed. California law includes provisions related to the unlawful concealment or retention of a runaway underage person from a lawful custodian. That legal framework is relevant in the context of Celeste's multiple reported disappearances and the documented evidence that David allegedly purchased a replacement phone for Celeste after her parents confiscated her device following the February 2024 welfare check. A specific documented act of circumventing a parental protective measure that occurred after law enforcement had explicitly informed David of Celeste's age and legal status as a reported runaway. Whether that documented act constitutes a separate charge under California law is a question for investigators and prosecutors, not one that the evidence alone can answer without a formal legal determination. What the documented record establishes clearly is the sequence. David was formally informed. Documented contact continued. A replacement phone was allegedly purchased and delivered to circumvent the parental restriction. Those are the facts. The legal characterization of those facts is the question the trial process will address.
Looks like she admitted that in January of 2023. A few months later, in May of 2023, she admits that she is a missing person. Look at that right here. And it's only a matter of time before the entire Discord is aware of this inappropriate relationship with Celeste and David, where he is actually saying that he and her have a kid on the way, and then says that the kid is due in March of 2025.
One element of the broader online discussion deserves direct acknowledgement because it represents a genuine problem for the public's ability to understand what is and is not established. The proliferation of unverified, anonymous, and increasingly speculative content about the investigation. The case attracted significant online content, Reddit threads, social media posts, blind items, anonymous screenshots, and competing theories, some of which was clearly intended as content production rather than information. One example circulating online featured a person claiming to communicate spiritually with Celeste following her tragedy. Whatever one's personal beliefs about spirituality, there is no verifiable basis for such a claim, and using the unresolved case of a young girl as a vehicle for content production represents a significant failure of basic respect for both the victim and the formal legal process seeking accountability for her. More broadly, the mixing of verified court evidence with anonymous online allegations, unverified screenshots, and speculative theories creates a public record that is genuinely difficult to navigate accurately. The standard that matters, the only standard that will determine the outcome of this case, is the beyond a reasonable doubt standard applied to verified, authenticated evidence presented in a court of law. Online consensus, Reddit verification, and social media discussion are not substitutes for that standard, and treating them as equivalent produces a fundamentally inaccurate picture of what is actually known and what has been legally established.
Look for David. Celeste, why did he do it? Do you feel like you've been receiving justice? Yes. Good. Is that you, Spirit?
What the totality of the publicly available information suggests, without overstating what has been legally established, is that the investigation surrounding David Anthony Burke extended beyond the formal charges involving Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Multiple individuals have publicly described close online relationships with David while they were underage. Multiple individuals have stated they contacted law enforcement. A private investigator publicly claimed access to additional individuals who provided documentation. The prosecution's formal evidence collection totaled approximately 40 terabytes across multiple devices and sources. What is not established by the public information is how many additional individuals provided accounts to investigators, whether additional charges will follow, what the full scope of the evidence collection contains, or how the trial will address evidence beyond what the preliminary hearing formally presented. Those questions will be answered by the legal proceedings themselves. David Anthony Burke has pleaded not guilty to all charges. He is presumed innocent unless and until the evidence establishes otherwise through the formal legal process. Whatever else the broader investigation ultimately reveals, she was a minor at the center of the formal charges, and her family has been in that courtroom for every day of the proceedings, waiting for formal accountability. California law includes provisions related to the unlawful concealment or retention of a runaway underage person from a lawful custodian, a legal framework directly relevant to the documented facts in this case. That framework matters specifically because of the February 2024 welfare check sequence and what followed it.
Were there more victims? Keep saying the four-letter R word. No. Was the song about you? Celeste, did you try to escape? Okay. Celeste, we love you. We're so sorry this happened to you.
Deputies formally informed David that Celeste was minor and had been reported as a runaway. That information was delivered directly in person by law enforcement during a documented welfare check at his property. It was not ambiguous. It was not secondhand. It was a direct formal notification from a deputy to David, captured on body camera, played in open court. Prosecutors alleged that contact continued after that notification. Specifically, they alleged that David drove to Celeste's community and paid a student from her junior high school $1,000 to deliver a replacement phone so that communication between them could resume after her parents had confiscated her device as a protective measure. That specific documented alleged act is not background context. It is a specific action with a specific payment, a specific destination, and a specific purpose that occurred after the formal law enforcement notification. Whether that specific documented act meets the legal threshold for California charges related to the concealment or retention of a reported runaway from a lawful custodian is a question for investigators and prosecutors and ultimately for the court. It is not something that the existence of the act alone can legally establish without a formal determination. What the documented record clearly establishes is the sequence: notification, documented continued contact, and a specific alleged action to circumvent a parental protective measure. That sequence is part of the formal court record. The broader question of how law enforcement handled the multiple welfare check visits, the 3 missing person reports filed in 2024, and the accumulated evidence that Celeste was repeatedly leaving home to be with David has been a significant part of the public discussion surrounding systemic failures in this case. Each individual intervention, the February 2024 welfare check, the first missing person report, the second, the third, appeared to treat the visible symptom rather than the underlying situation producing it. The welfare check in February 2024 confirmed Celeste was not physically present at the residence and accepted David's account of a single prior meeting. The missing person reports documented that she was leaving home repeatedly, but the documented evidence of what was driving those departures, the multi-year relationship, the ongoing communication, the Operation Awesome planning messages, was not identified and formally addressed during those 2024 interventions in a way that produced permanent separation. That systemic observation does not distribute legal responsibility across the institutions involved. David Anthony Burke is the only person charged with criminal conduct in this case. The question of why the protective systems around Celeste did not permanently interrupt the documented situation before April 23, 2025 is a question about institutional response that exists alongside the formal criminal case rather than within it. But it is a question the evidence forces, and it deserves to be named directly. Against this backdrop of documented communications, emerging accounts, and public investigation, one detail from the documented primary evidence deserves final emphasis: the scale of the digital evidence collection. Prosecutors have stated that approximately 40 terabytes of evidence were collected during the investigation, substantially larger than any figure previously associated with a single device. To understand what 40 terabytes represents in practical terms, a single terabyte of text-based data such as messages could theoretically hold billions of words. 40 terabytes of mixed digital content, messages, images, videos, audio recordings, application data, cloud backups, represents an investigation that extended across multiple devices, multiple platforms, and multiple years of activity. What that evidence contains beyond what was formally presented at the preliminary hearing is not publicly established. The 12 witnesses who testified at the preliminary hearing were described by the district attorney as representing a small fraction of the evidence. The full picture of what the 40 terabyte collection contains, how many individuals it documents, what periods it covers, what categories of alleged misconduct it addresses, will become visible only as the trial proceeds and that evidence is formally presented and tested. The public record of this case has reached a point where confirmed court evidence, journalistic documentation, online speculation, and anonymous allegations have all become part of the conversation simultaneously. Maintaining clear distinctions between those categories is not just analytically important. It is essential to understanding what the trial will actually determine. What the trial will determine whether the formal charges against David Anthony Burke are proven beyond a reasonable doubt before a unanimous jury. The trial will not determine every allegation that has circulated online. It will not adjudicate every relationship that has been described in public accounts. It will not resolve every public theory about the broader scope of the investigation. It will determine the formal criminal charges that have been filed. What the public record has already documented, regardless of trial outcome, is that a young girl named Celeste Rivas Hernandez was in contact with David Anthony Burke from the time she was minor, that she underwent an abortion. She attempted to establish distance from the relationship in March 2025, that her final known message asked someone to open a door, and that her remains were found inside his Tesla on September 8, 2025. Her family has been in that courtroom for every day of the proceedings. They are waiting for the formal accountability that only the trial can provide. David Anthony Burke has pleaded not guilty to all charges. He is presumed innocent unless and until the evidence establishes otherwise through the formal legal process. We will cover every confirmed significant development as this case moves toward trial. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you stay updated. SpillHop, we do not just report the story, we slow it all the way down, go deeper than the headlines, and make sure you actually walk away understanding what is really happening and why it matters. Several additional observations about the public discussion surrounding this case are worth making because they reflect on how high-profile cases involving young victims are discussed online, and what that discussion does and does not contribute to understanding the connection between David's music and his public persona is one area where online discussion has been particularly prone to overreach. His artistic alter ego, Itami, the fictional character whose imagery involved violence and crime, was a deliberately constructed creative element of his public identity. The existence of that character has led some online observers to treat his music, lyrics, and visual themes as a kind of documentary confession. That framing fundamentally misunderstands how artistic identity works. Artists who create extremely dark or violent content are not producing autobiographical documentation. The existence of violent imagery in creative work does not establish that the artist committed corresponding real-world acts. Courts have consistently recognized the distinction between artistic expression and evidence of criminal conduct, and any analysis of this case that fails to maintain that distinction will systematically overstate what the creative record establishes. What the creative record can legitimately contribute is context. Context for why specific images or references later felt meaningful to people who had interacted with David, including Jane's account of the arm-cutting joke and its resonance after the autopsy details became public. That contextual contribution is real and appropriate. The step from context to evidence requires something the creative work alone cannot provide, specifically a direct evidentiary link authenticated through the formal court process. The scale of public interest in this case has also created conditions in which the formal legal process can be obscured by the volume of online commentary, speculation, and content production surrounding it. The trial, when it begins, will be the only proceeding that actually and definitively determines David Anthony Burke's guilt or innocence on the formal charges through the only standard that legally matters: proof beyond a reasonable doubt before a unanimous jury. The distinction between court evidence, journalistic documentation, public allegation, and online speculation is the one this coverage has tried to maintain throughout, because Celeste Rivas Hernandez was a real person whose family is in that courtroom, and because the formal legal process seeking accountability for what happened to her deserves to be understood accurately and without the distortions that online speculation consistently introduces into high-profile cases. Every confirmed significant development will be covered here as the case moves toward trial and through every stage of those formal proceedings.